today's guest is a real lover of our great game. Toby Jones is a BAFTA and Olivier award-winning actor, famous for appearances in such films as Frost Nixon, The Hunger Games, Captain America, and the Harry Potter series. Off the screen, he's truly passionate about cricket, and, as we'll hear, makes sure he keeps up to date with the score and TMS wherever he might be in the world. In September 2019, during the final test match of a remarkable summer, Toby sat down next to me at the Oval. We began by discussing one of Toby's more recent roles, his narration of cricket documentary The Edge.
Forget what you think you know. England versus Australia. The Ashes. It's an opera. It's brutal. Intense. Think a fistful of dollars. Think rumble in the jungle. Remorseless. A judgment of your guts. Exposing your demons.
Yes, of course, it's Toby Jones. Welcome to Test Match Special, Toby.
Hi there, Dan.
The Edge, let's start with The Edge, because you're a massive cricket fan. I've been chatting to you outside.
Certainly a big fan of Test cricket in particular, and Barney Douglas, who made the film, listening to that text, I haven't heard that since we recorded it, and it's funny because I think Felix White has just released that as a single.
He has, yeah.
So I'm hoping to be top of the hit parade with that.
Oh,
I'm slightly worried about it now, listening to the text, and maybe if I'd known it was going to be a hit single, I could have adjusted it in some way.
Well, there's a danger you might actually. Top of the Pops has stopped now.
I know that. I do know that.
Coming back week after week and perform that. When you got the call to do that,
yeah,
I've just gone through a list, and it's a very small list of the many things that you've been in. And I suppose a lot of people go, "Oh, Harry Potter and Captain Marvel, etc." Secretly, was doing The Edge. Was it up there?
Yeah, I mean, you're very lucky in my job because you get these sort of unexpected opportunities to suddenly your hobbies, the things you use that are totally unrelated to your work, suddenly become linked to your work. And Test cricket has been such a big part of my sort of relaxation time, and is still a major source of connection between friends and stuff, and banter between friends. So then the chance to take part in a documentary about it, because I loved the Fire in Babylon, one about the West Indies tour. Just thrilling, thrilling to work with Barney, and then to see it at Lord's. I think we went to a screening in the Long Room, which is another great opportunity.
You've been watching Test cricket for an enormous amount of time. We discovered something extraordinary.
43 years ago, I think that would have been, wouldn't it?
43 years ago, you were sat, and it was almost this time of year, late August, wasn't it?
Well, the series was lost, wasn't it?
Yep. West Indies were 2-0 up, 1976. And it turns out that we were both sitting within about 20 yards of each other, the far end of the ground from where we're watching.
Absolutely extraordinary.
And it was the same day, wasn't it? It was the day that Dennis Amiss...
He was on 200, wasn't he, when the day started, and England were bowled out eventually. It was amazing. It was watching Holding for the first time coming in from the boundary here, and all those great players like Collis King, all the players I sort of fantasised about, they're just fantastic players. And at the end of the day, we thought, well, if we can get them out, quite quickly, and then Fredericks and Greenwich just stormed it, didn't they?
Well, they didn't lose a wicket, did they?
No.
I think they got, from memory, 186 without loss. So they didn't enforce the follow-on, which at the time was quite unusual, but I suppose it was very hot, wasn't it? It was boiling hot summer.
Yeah.
They didn't enforce the follow-on, and then sent England back out to bat, so we got to see yet more carnage. But what was it about that team? Because you talk to anybody, any Englishman about that team, and they still revel in the wonder of that side in a way that, I'm not sure that young England fans will have a fond memory of Cummins and Hazelwood taking their batting side apart. But there's something about when you were sort of 10, 11, the exoticism, the brilliance of that side.
Well, I didn't really... I'd been into cricket for some time then. I'd been playing it a lot, but I'd never been to a live Test match. And that was the first series where I really understood this 5-day business, that you were into something that was going to last for 5 whole days, and that you could be involved in an unfolding drama of that. of course, many of the tests in that series didn't last the full 5 days, but they were the first big personalities that I sort of got used to. You know, I was vaguely aware of Thompson and Lilly just before that, and Gooch getting those 2 ducks. And that was sort of like very, like, you know, that was sort of vague. But this series, I was totally engaged with Richards, and because Richards was just so exciting to watch, and Greenwich, and then this sort of legendary thing of Holding coming in from the boundary, and this unrelenting pace that everyone's always talked about. It's funny, actually, years later, I was on holiday in Antigua in a restaurant, and I was going, God, it's just amazing to be here in the West Indies. I remember that series. This is it. And we went to St John's ground in St John's, and it was just, I was so sort of like thrilled by it. There was no cricket going on at the time, just club cricket. And Andy Roberts walked into this restaurant with 2 fish for the guy behind, you know, to barbecue behind. And I just sort of went up to him in a sort of trance, because this guy had been a sort of seminal personality in getting me into Test cricket, really, because he was such a gentle, fierce cricketer. You know.
Well, they're larger than life characters, aren't they? Well, I think when you're a kid, every cricketer that comes into your orbit is larger than life. I mean, have you met Michael Holding yet? He's just down the road.
No. Slightly nervous.
We need to make. We absolutely need to make that happen. It's especially nerve-wracking here at the Oval. You mentioned there people like Viv Richards and Michael Holding, and I want to talk more about your cricket, but just a brief segue on that. You talk a lot about. You've just been talking about Test cricket and the time that it takes up, but also you talked there about the mannerisms of Viv Richards, and your acting is a lot connected with mannerisms and movement, isn't it? And body movement.
Yes, I mean, I suppose everyone's acting is to a certain extent. I wish I had a sort of more noble mission in this, but I can't help but be interested in human behaviour, and where the drama school I trained at, the physical life of characters you play was at the forefront of it. So when you watch, in this case, say, sportsmen, I'm fascinated by the mannerisms of batsmen between balls, the way people focus themselves. You know, obviously we talk about Steve Smith, you know, and all of that behaviour that seems superfluous, and yet is, you know, intimately linked to how they perceive their purpose in the game and their concentration. But, you know, you're trying to find that in any character you play. But those guys, the West Indians, it was almost like we really are putting in the minimum amount of effort to beat you so thoroughly. And that is what made them so kind of cool and so exciting. And you remember, Dan, it was very different here because the fans then, it was the atmosphere was so fantastic as well, because this was like the local ground for most of the West Indian population, you know.
Well, you remember the terrace away to our right by the Archbishop Tennyson School? That used to be where clanking cans,
steel drums, all right.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
It was a totally different atmosphere, and it was much vaster as well. I don't think that's just in my childhood imagination. The actual outfield was that much vaster, and Holding was creating kind of theatre, wasn't he, by running in so far. Viv Richards had that much further to swagger to the wicket.
Yeah. The swagger is what you loved, and you know, in my own sort of ridiculous way, you know, when you're learning to play a sport, you start by acting like cricketers you've seen on TV, and you know, even when I was very, very young, playing in the back garden, and you're commentating on yourself playing cricket, you're sort of imitating the cricketers you see on TV. So there you can be Viv Richards or Collis.
So would you do that? Would you sort of walk out of your back garden shed, sort of pretend you're Viv Richards, have a little swagger? I'm
not sure about the shed business. I think the pavilion may have been, that would have been slightly worrying if it had gone that far. I don't know whether you did.
Well, the Chappells did. The Chappell brothers used actually to play whole test matches against each other. So you had to get out 10 times. And when they were out, they would go back into the kitchen, walk into the utility room, and then back out again.
Throw the bat as the against the wall.
And then pick it up and come out as the number 3.
I love it.
Which is, I mean, that's taking
mine was half-baked in comparison with that. But I mean, yeah, we would commentate on each other and take turns in commentary and sort of like fight over who was going to commentate as you bowled and batted and stuff.
Sorry, would that be with your friends?
Friends,
or?
yeah. Not with myself.
No.
That would be more worrying.
Well, no, I did do that in front of a mirror. Yes.
Yeah.
I'd go the whole hog. So who was the commentary voice in your head? What would it be? Would it be? And here's Jones. He smashes it through the covers.
I'm not going to do it for you, Dan.
No.
It would have been Benno, I think, because Benno was so. His presence and his, you've got to call it wisdom in retrospect. His outlook on the game, sort of studied sort of circumspection on everything. It was so grown up, so sober, so unemotional, and you sort of aspire to that, even though what you were doing was so completely driven by mad enthusiasm and fandom and kind of wanting to look like people. But Benno was kind of like a counterpoint to all that, and he was who we all commentated on. And I have to say, latterly, in the field, with as I played as an adult, everyone would sort of be doing Benno impersonation, with each other as people over dramatise their fielding.
So what was the young Toby Jones doing? Was he scoring the hundreds and taking 5 wickets, or were you realistic about your role in the top levels of cricket?
Absolutely not. No. I mean, I did play for the school team under 13 level, and then I played kind of in a classic village cricket team in Charlbury, which is in the Cotswolds. And I had this. What I remember is a kind of idyllic scene where I went to school by train. I'd come back from train, literally go straight to the cricket club and play in the evenings there, which was just fantastic. And I did that, early teens and stuff. And then at school I'd play for second 11 really. And of course I wanted to be a fast bowler because I could run like Michael Holding, I thought. And then I went to the indoor cricket school at Lord's, and I think it's Don Ellis or whoever the guy was there put me right on a few things about my self-perception and said, I think you need to bowl spin. And so I tried to bowl spin. I've tried to bowl spin ever since.
Off spin. Yes, I mean that is the last refuge of the scoundrel.
Yes.
Off spin. And a bit of batting as well. I mean, you must have heard Richie Benno intoning, as your 100 came up off Andy
batting
Roberts.
Fine with a tennis ball in the back garden. Not quite so much when you're out in the middle. I think again, it's interesting. The idea of telling this. I was going to slightly this thing of telling the story of my innings before it had actually happened. So you hit a good shot, and then you make the mistake of going, today is going to be the day that I make my big innings. I can feel it. This is it.
Yeah.
This is what happens, And I'm sort of haunted by a cover drop. The best shot, probably the only really good shot I've ever played in a competitive cricket match. And I was out next ball, but it was this shot, and I thought, well, if only I'd listened to all that training rather than pretended to listen to it. And I think in a weird way now, you sort of feel like at my age now, I'd listen to the coaching more than I did then. And, in a way, players sort themselves out when they're younger to the people who actually do listen and work on their technique rather than sort of pretend to.
Well, this ties in very nicely, I think, with one of the things you told me you did. I did exactly the same thing as a child. You developed an elaborate game of dice cricket. Now, firstly, I've got to ask you.
It's ever more embarrassing, but yes.
Well, don't be embarrassed. I had one.
Yeah.
I'd calculated you had to roll 8 sixes in order to get out handled the ball, because that happens roughly once every 900,000 balls. So.
Yeah.
So,
well, the problem was the 5.
You're among friends.
The problem was the 5. There were far too many 5s scored.
Well, I didn't score 5s. So 5 and 6. 1, 2, 3 and 4 were dot balls, and 5 and 6, something happened.
Yeah.
And then you rolled again to find out if what had happened was actually nothing or something. And on it went. So it was similarly sort of baroque in its kind of rules. I can't remember them all as well as you can, Dan, but they were elaborate rules. I think the most pitiful thing I've probably ever done would be cheating. When a person, I think John Edrich once scored 515 in a game of dice that I was playing, and I managed to sort of avoid. I dropped the dice rather than get him out because it was such a remarkable innings. I did exactly the same. The only time I didn't cheat was when I was batting.
Yes.
Because occasionally, did you put yourself in a team?
No, I wish I could.
Did you
say,
never do that?
No, I never did that. I never did.
So all of your narratives were grounded in some kind of reality.
Yes, it was usually England versus the rest of the world. Yeah, that was the one. I
Oh,
used to do.
wow.
Yeah,
Because
because it was the era of those games being played, and that whole and about the time of the Packer stuff, wasn't it? It was beginning, and that was all so glamorous. The idea of World 11s and who would you put in your World 11, and it was such a great game to play with your friends about who was really good enough, like we knew, but
yeah,
but
you were selector, weren't you? You were chief selector. You were architect. You were God, basically, when you ran
and
those
all you'd
games.
really done is listening to other people's opinions and edit it out,
That's right. And you said John Edrich there, so that obviously Surrey man. You'd have come to the Oval a bit, did you? I mean, because you're from Oxford, aren't you?
Yeah, I very early on I lived in Surrey, but I sort of say my home was near, as I say, Charlbury Cricket Club was the first, which is about 50 miles north of Oxford, and that's where I grew up really, and played all village cricket, and school. It was all the games were around there as well.
But you see, you can always tell when somebody says that they love Test cricket, and then they say that I've cheated to make sure that John Edrich, of all people, has got 515.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a timeless test required for that, I think. which rather intrigues me. So now, we discovered earlier that you played cricket with our engineer, Brian Mack.
That's right, Brian. Brian's a very, able, stubborn batsman in my mind's eye. I don't know what he's like now because I haven't played with him for a long time. But we used to travel with a team that began life as the Radio Journalists 11, and then became the Butler 11, named after our late friend Gareth Butler, who was a news producer and a very useless left-arm spinner, but a fantastic captain who would arrange, in the tradition of great sort of Sunday teams. We'd have awards dinners, averages, batsman of the year, man of the year, all of that. And he was, in the tradition of the Rain Men and stuff like that. He was just a fantastic organiser, and Brian and I were both part of that team.
Did you ever win any awards?
I think I got a Man of the Year award, which was very nice because I never, I feel uncomfortable even talking about myself in the averages because I was in the averages, but always in the lower half.
So you're listening to the actor Toby Jones here on View from the Boundaries. I can see a band of probably Coldstream Guards or something playing away to my left. The Scots Guard, apparently. There's glorious setting here during the lunch break at the Oval with England 159 ahead, 2 wickets down. You must
in
be
the balance.
pleased.
In the balance.
It's in the balance, is
in
it,
the
for
balance.
Because you've seen a lot of this series, have you?
Well, yeah, it's been. Well, I mean, the World Cup was sort of like a palate cleanser, wasn't it, for this amazing kind of test series? It's just gripping. I was telling Henry earlier on that one is constantly sort of immobilised in one's own house. Like when you should be getting on with stuff. You find yourself staring into, open space, unable to complete a task with a utensil in your hand, trying to finish a job, and then 3 overs pass and you get you complete a motion or something like that. But it's kind of, it's been so gripping.
How do you cope with being away so much while it's going on? I mean, do you sort of hide away in covers? Do you say to the director and the producer, "Oh, I've got a bit of a hamstring today.
Let's check the score."
Just need to go and hide somewhere." I mean, I've hidden in a cupboard from an ex-girlfriend in order to get the cricket score.
How's that relationship going?
It's over. Because it must be pretty tricky. Often you're abroad.
Yeah.
We've run through a whole load of films you're in, so you frequently find yourself.
Well, it's
America,
it's much easier now because of the internet, or whatever. You try and befriend a member of the camera crew, whatever, who's into cricket, and they'll keep you informed of what's going on. And there are ways and means of getting hold of TMS wherever you are in the world. So I do that, and indeed I've got friends all over the world who also listen to TMS, either online or on the radio.
But it must be. I mean, I would find it deeply frustrating. It's why I gave up the previous job.
Really?
Yeah, well, I got sick of inventing meetings that didn't exist and then running away to another part. Because I imagine that
I miss the television. I miss the television side of it. I mean, when the BBC lost that, I used to really love that. having the radio on and watching the images, as well.
But you told me, I mean, radio is a very important part of your life, because we've gone through a whole load of things that you've been in.
Yeah.
But actually, you've got a massive presence on the radio in drama as well, haven't you?
Well, I grew up listening to the radio, music and documentary and drama, and now, in addition with podcasts and everything, radio sort of takes up most of my time in a way that television I find harder to sort of engage with for long periods of time. Maybe because I read a lot of drama, inevitably, that one's watching dramas, trying to figure out how it works, what's working, why it got commissioned, what is the USP of it, how does it why has it been chosen to be shown, and often distracted by it. I can go to a cinema and watch a movie, but often I find it quite hard to watch drama at home. Whereas radio, I find totally absorbing, both to do and to listen to.
I mean, some people might find that quite surprising, because one of the things that strikes me about watching you act in a number of different performances, but I'm thinking, I'm a particular fan of directorists, and don't forget the driver.
You mean detectorists?
Detectorists.
Yeah.
It's a terrible word. Yeah. They need to come up with a better word. But
it's a running gag in the show that it's the actual word of it. Yeah.
And it's there's something about your performances which I sort of characterise as a kind of glum serenity. Your face, the camera lights on this rather sort of glum serenity, as I say, into which we read so much in silence. And then suddenly it dramatically explodes because an event has occurred. An ex-girlfriend has arrived in the house and is destroying your life and taking you away from the thing that you're trying to do. And the other part, a lot of both of those dramas, I'm going to call them really, because they have comic moments in them, but they feel dramatic to me, is sort of gazing into your face to try to understand the inner workings of you. Yeah. And it's deeply challenging because we're not quite sure where you're at. And then you suddenly explode. And yet you've just said about radio, and yet...
Well, I mean, in terms of gazing at my face, I can only apologise. I wish that on anyone. But it's directors you have to really blame for that. I think that they think and believe, thankfully, that I always remember... It's an unlikely source of acting theory, but Hugh Grant saying in an interview that if the miraculous thing about a camera when it's pointed at an actor is if they've got their thoughts organised in the right sequence, and if they've got what they're thinking, there is something in the camera that allows the audience to read the mind of the actor. And I remember thinking about that and going, well, I think that is, I have experienced that watching certain actors. And I aspire to that. And so when I'm engaged in doing that, directors often opt for a shot of watching me do that. And certainly for those shows you mentioned, like Detectorists or Don't Forget the Driver, the comedy is often about people, wrestling with their interior doubts about emotions, really. That's often the characters that I are playing in comedies, and hopefully there's something quite interesting in watching someone coping with that and the audience trying to work out what they are thinking.
Are you surprised by the success of them? Because when you've got the script for Detectorists, Mackenzie Crook wrote the script with you in mind. If you're looking for a sort of a sitcom or something, you go straight to the gags. I mean, Dad's Army, formulaic, you've got these lovely characters and they can just repeat the same sort of thing every time. But in that, I mean, looking at the script, could you see in your mind's eye that how it was going to look?
Well, I mean, the thing about Mackenzie, he's a unique writer. And performer. He came up to. We'd been in several films, but never in the same scene. We featured in about 6 or 7 films before we actually met each other, and then we played a double act in a second Muppet movie. And he said, he's a very shy guy, genuinely shy, genuinely modest and humble, and just great company. And he came over to you and he sort of mumbled that he'd written something with me in mind, and wasn't that a nightmare when someone offered you a bit of writing, because then you'd have to respond to whether, if you didn't like it, what were you going to have to say to them? And if you didn't like it, he wouldn't take it personally. And I should just say, and if I didn't want it sent to me, then I won't send it. I said, because you just send me he said, well, I'll send you 5 pages of dialogue. And the email came through, and I read this dialogue. And the thing that struck me most about it was, as you say, it wasn't gags. There were laugh lines in it, but it was about 2 men searching for treasure in their lives as much as in metal detecting. And I had no desire to be in a kind of sitcom, but I had a real desire to act this character because he was a dreamer, and I think one of the successes of the show, I suppose, is that they hit on genuine treasure in their life because they have time with each other as mates. They have time to have a drink, to chat things over, for banter, and these are the things that people dream of having time for that increasingly people don't have time for. And in a way, they've already found their treasure, and I think that people got that basic contract. And so that didn't feel like I was doing a comedy. It felt like we were creating 2 characters.
By the way, the first series is going to be repeated of Detectorists on BBC 4 tonight.
Excellent.
Yes.
This is fortuitous, isn't it? It's almost like a plug.
It's almost working out perfectly,
Yeah,
exactly. Am I pushing it too far in the way you've described those 2 characters to link it to cricket, in the sense that a lot of the time cricket fans, especially Test cricket fans, come along to the cricket for 5 days to sort of to create that different pace from their life, so they're not
totally. Yeah, I mean that's what I mean when I first understood, age 10 or 11, that this thing was going to go on for 5 days. That was almost the most exciting thing, because I was used to 90-minute sport. I wasn't really used to 5-day sport, and there is a sense of being distracted and taken out of, a bit like when you go on a film set, you sort of disappear from everyday 24-hour life, and you're in a different time zone. And Test match cricket gives you that other opportunity where you sort of time out from everyday life. There's a sort of parallel reality going on.
With both that and, don't forget, the driver, there's a sort of Englishness to it. They're quite deliberately set in places. It's Suffolk, isn't it, and Bognor.
Yep.
And I want to ask you this. Last year, you made Don't Forget the Driver, and if you haven't watched it, I urge you to go and see it, because it's an extraordinary piece. I don't know whether it's a comedy, or I do know it's a drama. And again, it's very challenging, because your central character is filled with massive challenges.
Yes.
As a lorry driver, taking various people,
coach driver,
around a variety of different sort of English heritage locations. Exactly. But your private life is
chaotic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's a load of themes in there that are germane to the modern English world.
Yeah.
But it was set in glorious sunshine, because it was last summer.
It was like Bognor was like LA.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's this sort of bleakness to the narrative, but it's lit with this piercing, glorious blue, which is a contrast that. Were you happy with that contrast, or deep down I could have done with a few more sort of brooding grey clouds to symbolise the turmoil of your character,
Well, that's the thing. I think in a way, that's what we expect from the British seaside, is kind of rain and gloom. And in a weird way, I think you're right that we both sort of went, it's probably going to be that kind of weather, and it'll be, and that will probably be a good thing. And actually, I think it worked very well that it wasn't like that, because it's almost less expected. It's more extraordinary, and Bognor is an extraordinary place, whether you like it or whether you find it depressing. It's an extraordinary place, and we tried to find what makes Bognor extraordinary, like any place, when you attend to it and its particular stresses, where a town is happy or where a town is experiencing trouble, you find out something extraordinary about the people who are living there. And it felt right in a way that we celebrated Bognor with the weather, that we saw Bognor in its best possible light. And I'm sure that the show has triggered many people to choose Bognor as a go-to holiday location.
I myself have booked to go straight there.
It's been sold out ever since.
Yeah, I was going to go in early January. I thought that
exactly.
Probably.
Well, you can depend on the weather.
Now, let's do a massive handbrake turn here, because these are things that I know you for.
Yeah.
and also TV.
Yeah.
But I've got to confess that apart from the Hunger Games, which I'm a big fan of, strange, I absolutely adore the Hunger Games.
Who doesn't like a dystopia?
I love it. I love it. Yeah, Rollerball was one of my favourite films as a kid. But you have appeared in some of the biggest film franchises in history, iconic TV shows as well, as we've discussed. But Harry Potter,
Yes.
the Hunger Games, Marvel films. I mean, when you're taking these parts, are you working on Don't Forget the Driver at the same time? And if so, what kind of a strange mix and match world is that you're in when you're sort of surrounded by all the bells and whistles, the intimidation, in a way, it would seem to me, of Hollywood stardom, and also writing a sort of deeply affecting, quiet, sort of semi-bucolic.
Yeah, well, if you're lucky enough, and I know this sounds like, sort of disingenuous, but if you're lucky enough to work as a British actor, you get access to these very different registers of work, and some people don't want to work when they start making movies. They go, I don't want to do TV, I don't want to do radio, I don't want to do stage. But I've always thought the great thrill of being an actor in this country is that those 4 different media are open to you, and the contrast is sort of the great thing about it, that I could film a scene. I mean, Harry Potter's an interesting one because I always feel a bit odd taking any credit for playing Dobby, because the thing is a special effect made by Industrial Light, by very clever people at Industrial Light and Magic who created this thing, and I voiced it to begin with. The second time, in the 7th film, when the character appears, the special effects had developed so much that they could trace my movement, and I was able to inhabit the character much more.
So you physically acted?
Yeah, I physically sort of created the world, and sort of as Dobby died, I acted that scene out on the beach with Daniel, and then someone who was closer to the size of Dobby did that. They filmed that, and then they did it with the model, and so they had all these different sources of reference. But I was much more in charge of, if you like, the acting of the part. But when you're voicing a character, you have a slightly more ambiguous relationship, because you sort of feel so much of the wit and life of those characters is really the people who've animated it, and I've just provided the voice. But it's great if you get to move like them.
Is that because of your initial training? Because you know.
Well, I think any actor feels like that. I think a sort of. If you're voicing something, you don't have quite the same relationship as if it's you there moving as well.
You played Captain Mannering in Dad's Army. Now, that's a part that's been inhabited by somebody else so iconically.
Yeah.
So, thinking exactly along those sort of terms, what do you do there? Do you decide to create your Captain Mannering, or are you massively influenced by the Captain Mannering that everybody understands as Captain Mannering?
It's a very, very good question, Dan. When I was approached about doing the film, I said, that's a great idea, good luck with that, and I hope you make lots of money, and I won't be doing that. And then I heard who was going to be in it, and I read the script by Hamish McColl, and there was something about it, it just became irresistible until I had to actually do it, when it suddenly became incredibly resistible again. And I suppose what I was, because it was a feature-length thing, and I associate Dad's Army with like a 28-minute storyline, and he had something that was 90-minute long. I suppose if it's interesting, if you see Captain Mannering, he's a pompous character, knocked over, he's sort of debunked his pomposity, his arrogance, he's so inflated. But if you see that over half an hour, you can sort of accept it and you just go, that's just funny, he needs taking down a bit. But if you see it over 90 minutes, something more pathos starts to creep in, and you create another dimension to the character, which is like, this guy, he's a bit like the guy who shows up to run the cricket team on a Sunday team, who can't play very well, but he's sort of in charge and gets annoyed at people being late and annoyed at people not behaving well.
Like the Richard Briers character sort of thing in Ever Decreasing Circles.
Exactly.
Sort of thing.
And there's a certain nobility to that character. They're not just an idiot. And I tried to find something of that. In terms of acting it, you can't escape Arthur Lowe, because he was a genius and his voice is somewhere entirely in that character. But I suppose I tried to... add to the canon of that character if that was possible.
I mean, a lot of these roles that you're doing, I'm thinking now of Marvellous, for example, because Captain Mainwaring is sort of based on a real person, Arthur Lowe, in a strange sort of way. And similarly in Marvellous, when you play the kit man at
Nello,
Stoke, I mean, that is one of the most affecting and incredible stories. But you played a character there where you're just upbeat all the time. I mean, you spend most of your acting world, it seems to me, being racked with horror and expressing that with the tiniest movements. Whereas here was a much more open. You went to a BAFTA for Marvellous.
Well, but it won a BAFTA.
It won a BAFTA. And it was an extraordinary piece, an extraordinary story. Did you spend some time with?
I spent
Neil?
all the time we were filming, because one of the unique things about that show was that he featured in it. In between scenes, I would discuss his character with him and the course of his life with him, and then we would go into the drama again. And so I got to know him incredibly well. And I remember he's such a fantastic guy, Neil Baldwin. I remember him predicting the BAFTA on day 2 of filming.
That is upbeat, isn't it?
Extremely upbeat.
Toby Jones, we're going to have to cut this short, I'm afraid, because the players are making their way out, the umpires are out. But before we do, could you be convinced to play Stephen Smith in the biopic? I just think that is a part that is nailed on for you.
Well, that's very kind of you say so, Dan. If you're genuine, I'm happy to take it on. There's a lot to work with.